90% of your audience are lurkers. So how do you design for the quiet ones without losing the loud ones? That's the question Ahna Boley asks and answers in a way that might just change how you run your next meeting, learning session, or virtual event. Welcome back to the Mike Method, where we explore leadership, connection, and what it means to thrive in a distracted world. In today's episode, we dive into the attention economy, the AI boom, and why our craving for real connection might be the most powerful design principle of the next decade. My guest is Ahna Boley, founding member, president, and CXO of AA Labs, a gamified online engagement platform designed to turn passive attendees into active participants. With a background in immersive experience design across entertainment, tech, and gaming, Ahna has spent over a decade building events and digital spaces that actually feel human. Whether it's a virtual product launch or a 3D learning environment, she's obsessed with how to help people feel seen, heard, and meaningfully involved, even when they're just lurking. Today, we talk about how to design digital experiences that actually hold attention, the neuroscience behind palate cleansers and state breaks in learning, what AI is doing to our creativity, and how not to get dumber by using it, why choice and agency are at the core of adult learning, and how to build spaces that leave people feeling and saying, I felt connected. If you've ever led a virtual workshop, built a learning platform, or attended an online event that felt flat, this conversation will change the way you think about digital engagement. Let's dive in. Ahna, I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So every time I pick up my phone, there's a distraction there. Something is vying for my attention, whether it's Instagram. I kind of avoid Facebook like the plague at this stage, but like LinkedIn, I don't know. So there's always something on there. I don't know how many WhatsApp chat groups and iMessage chat groups I'm in. Something is always trying to draw away my attention. And so, we talk about the attention economy from a social media perspective, but like it's having an effect on us day to day, and it's having an effect on our ability to just consume information that's important to us in our careers and our lives. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million different things always vying for our attention. Even now, I'm like, did I close enough tabs so that I'm not going to be staring at something else while we're talking today? But, when it comes to attention, I think that in some ways we've dumbed down our abilities because everything's chopped into 15, 30 seconds, right? If I can't get it in the first 5 seconds, I'm moving on to something else.
Right.
There might have been something really important at, the minute mark, but I didn't get there because it didn't capture my attention. It's that idea of like never judge a book by its cover, but yet we all do, right? It's just something that we innately do. And so when it comes to attention in the business world, we have to think about when you're creating a product, how are people going to use it and how long are they going to stay, right? Everyone wants the daily active users to be on there, several hours a day, but in reality, you're not going to get that unless you're just an Instagram, right? You're doom scrolling, you might get it. Right. And so in technology that we look to build as a company is how do you get the most effective amount of time to translate what you need them to understand in a way that they're going to get it and then move on. And I think that's really important to think about, right? Not just what you're building, but what you're also sending via email, right? Bullet points. Give me bullet points, right? Don't give me long paragraphs because your mind just kind of blurs over with things of that nature. So I don't know. People I don't think about attention enough when it comes to what they're building, how they're writing, what they're using. I could go on for forever, but drive me in a direction you want to talk about attention.
Well, I think there's an angle of neuroplasticity to this too, right? Because if I am wired for, either sound bites or video clips, and those are 15, 30 seconds, whatever, then any other long form, whether it's I'm reading a book or I'm needing to watch like a longer video, or I need to pay attention in whether it's a development or training session of some description, they're going to feel really long. And so as an experienced designer, how do you think about like state breaks and the different modalities that you need to shift when you know that you've got an audience that has been basically training their brain away from being able to focus? Like, how do you think about that?
In a lot of ways, it's like storytelling.
Okay.
When you're, think about a book, like you have chapters, right? At the end of the chapter, you kind of get a blank page, you finished, now let's move on to the next thought, right? It's not just about the cliffhanger or the end of the episode on Netflix. Are you still watching, right? It's more about, we need some conclusion. Because our brains are wired in the sense that you have the beginning, middle, and the end. And when you don't get that, you're not satisfied, but people move on too quickly. And so it's the idea of like, hey, can we close that loop before we move on to the next topic? from a meeting perspective, when you're thinking about a Zoom or, kind of what we're chatting in right now, in your background, there are pictures, which I'm like, oh, very curious what they are.
Yeah.
And you actually, obviously showed me beforehand what they were, just so my curiosity would be swayed so we can have
Yeah.
a conversation without me
Right.
focusing on something else. And so how do you create a space, whether it is Zoom or a third party, a software like something that our company has built at AA Labs, where your focus isn't on the background or what's
Mm.
around you, but on the topic at hand? Or if
Right.
there is something behind you, it's actually reinforcing the topic that you're talking about. So instead of maybe being a picture of your family behind, it would be, something about the podcast or something about, the main point of the podcast is behind you in a script, so that every time I'm hearing, I'm also seeing it. And now my neurodivergent mind can actually take in more types of information around the same context versus, forcing me to read the email later and when I'm not in the same mindset. So that's like one area of, I think, how we can design spaces better for communication. And then also, one thing I like to do is palate cleanse in between each topic, right?
So
So,
yeah, so I think of palate cleansing like when you go for dinner and they're like, "Hey, have this little treat in between. It's gonna get you ready for the next." So, what is palate cleansing in the context of learning and being in an environment?
yeah, so in a digital space, one that maybe you can move around, or let's say like in a video game, right? In between each scene, there's like a little quick story that changes you from each topic,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or there's a joke, or
Right.
something that allows you to say, okay, we've stopped this topic, we're
Right.
now moving on, and now like we can shift our focus into something different, whether that is getting up for 30 minutes and stretching, doing 5 squats before the next conversation, so that you just get that little break. But your brain was not meant to sit in a meeting like this for 45 minutes, 2-3 hours. You need to get up, move around, give your mind a sense to shut down and recharge for a few seconds. That way you can really talk about the next topic effectively.
It's what we noticed. So we started doing virtual learning in 2010, and what we noticed almost immediately was the difference between an in-person session. So say an in-person session is 4 hours long. The virtual session needed to be maybe max 3.5 hours. We needed to have a break every hour. Whereas in person, we might be able to stick with one topic for an entire hour and then have a state break. And really the state break was actually go get coffee and a donut. Like it was or a cookie, right? Like that was the state break. But what we noticed online is that we needed to actually change the modality of the learning. So if we were doing like a large group interaction, we can only do that large group interaction for like sometimes 5 minutes, maybe max 15 minutes. And then we'd need to switch to a breakout room. And then coming out of a breakout room, we need to go into a whiteboard session. And then coming out of that, we would need to go into, okay, now let's go into the chat. And I'm going to drop a question in, and then people are going to answer in the chat. And then they'd finish that. I'm like, cool, we're going to do a poll next. And so we had to have these ways of shifting, because obviously as the session is being facilitated, we can see the videos because we have multiple panels, and one of the panels just shows the videos of all the participants in the room, and you can tell, like you can just look at their eyes and see when they're not engaged, right?
Glazed over,
or this,
second
or they're
screen,
second screen, or
have
they're
their phone in their hand,
right, or even if they don't, you can't see the phone in their hand, you can see their head tilted down, and you're like, okay, well, I know you're not paying attention. So we started playing with how frequently we needed to do state changes. It wasn't just a state change as the narrative shifting, because the narrative needed to shift in person. We had to figure out the modality of the learning had to change to just keep people interested. So when you're building, so that's what we learn. I'm super curious to know, as you build out environments, like what are you thinking about in the actual environment itself online that is helping to create that narrative and to create those state breaks?
I think you're right. The modality shift has to be more frequent, and it also has to reinforce the conversation. So sometimes people just like throw it in because, oh, I just need to break something up. But if it has nothing to do with the topic, then it's not worth the squeeze, right?
Yeah.
But even visually, like what you're sharing on the screen, people that just are sharing a presentation and walking you through it, they're just talking at you. So how do you get people involved into the conversation more effectively? By giving them choice. So then they're able to, instead of maybe forcing them into a breakout room, they get to choose by topic what interests them. And that way you're going to get people talking about what they care about and giving you better feedback than like Joe Schmo, who doesn't care about HR as much. And so he's not going to have any feedback for you that's going to be useful when you do that breakout session, right? And if you also think about a live event, right? You have the ability to get up and to go to the breakouts that you want to go to at that conference. You're not
Right.
told like, hey, you just have to go to this meeting.
Yeah.
And so people forget about choice and how that
Oh, right.
really makes you feel um, in control, but also like you're giving them a false sense of choice, right? You're controlling where they're going, but they
What's that?
still feel like, oh, I chose this room, right? But it's like, well,
There's a there's a
I gave you
phrase
the
for it
option.
too.
Yeah,
It's called fallacy of limited options. I feel like I have choice, but I'm really choosing between these four things.
exactly. And that's why you get overwhelmed at like, the Cheesecake Factory, great
Oh,
food, but that menu, like,
it's
I
like
can't.
ridiculous.
I
Yeah.
can't. Give me like 20 options. I'm good to go, or I just start, blind choosing
Yeah.
items off the menu. And so you can't give them that choice paralysis. But topics that people care about, allowing them to choose. That's why polls are great. But then you also have, 90% of people that participate online are lurkers, right?
They're lurking.
They just want to scroll. They want to like see what's going on. They're not going to comment. You'll
Okay.
have about 1% of active contributors. And then the other 9% are like highly active, semi-active, but they may not always be participant, right? And so when you think about the group, your
Right.
overwhelming amount is lurkers. So how do you get them to actually feel like they're being a part of something? And that's where like experiential design, rethinking, and one of the big things I think about why people don't do it enough is because it takes time, right? To rethink how you do an online meeting or to rethink a space or a new technology, people have to be willing to learn. They have to be willing to try new things and have time to build it. And they don't want to do that. They want to say, oh, I have a meeting in 10 minutes. I'm going to read 2 sentences and I'll go to that meeting. And so there has to be a shift, I think, mentally as well, that you're willing to give more of yourself and be more attentive and stop lurking.
There's two things I want to touch on from what you said there. So one, the concept of overdoing a slide. So, I think there's some slide presentations where there's so much text on the slide that really the people aren't really listening to what you're saying. They're just reading the slide, the
Yeah.
PowerPoint slide, which is not really the purpose of that, right? And I think, slides with imagery and as little text as possible so that people are focused on the conversation. They're focused on each other. They're not focused on, I got to try to consume everything that's on the
Yeah.
slide. I know I get caught myself, right? Where I see something and I'm like, oh, I got to like read all this stuff. Even though the person is like presenting it and ostensibly I can just sit back. I can't help myself. Like the words are there. I have to read them.
Exactly.
And then I think that the second thing is this design principle. If you're designing for the 1% of highly engaged, or even the 9% of moderately engaged, that's 10% of your audience that you're designing for. When the reality is, and this is weird because I've never thought about it this way. This is why I find this conversation or the stats that you shared so fascinating is like, actually, if you have to design an experience for the 90% that are lurking without losing the 1% and the 9%, right? Like this, you still want to have the ability for them to be engaged, but how do you create the environment in a way so that people can effectively lurk, I guess is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, you got to give them something to do that doesn't require them to maybe verbally speak, because that's where
Okay.
your introverts will like never answer a question if there's 100 people on a call, right? They're gonna be
Yeah.
like, nope, maybe in the chat if they have like a real high opinion.
Yeah.
And they might answer a poll, right? Because that's anonymous, right? They can
Yeah.
just click a button. And so, how do you create experiences for them that allow them to pay attention? So if they miss it, they feel like they missed out on it. So a little bit of FOMO, but then also allow them to do it anonymously,
Okay.
and that will get them to be more engaged, right? So kind of going back to the example of if we were in more of like a 3D world, if you will, if I could click on the pictures behind you while you're talking, each of them would open up a point that you're trying to make
Yeah.
or a poll for me to take. Or now I can click on something, I have choice. I have the ability to do it anonymously without you knowing that I'm doing it. I'm still listening to you, but I'm also kind of multitasking within the parameters of the conversation. Now you've engaged me in some way.
Mm.
And so if you think about like live experiences too, even like an escape room, you're going to have that 1% that are running around the room, finding all the clues. You're going to have the one that is like, oh, this is a pretty design, right? And then
Yeah.
the lurker will be there to help, but they might be the one that only chimes in when they really know the answer, right? They're just
Right.
kind of listening and taking it all in. So it's kind of building everything on a multi-level, because we're leaving 90% of people on the table, and that's a whole group that you're not really monetizing. in a lot of ways.
Well, it's interesting too when you say to be able to double click on something in the background, because obviously on a PowerPoint slide, it's a static image, it's got some words and some pictures maybe, but like you can't do anything with it. Whereas if you've got a purpose-built environment, as you say, like you can click the pictures, you can click the poll button, and you can kind of, it reminds me of those books. Like, I don't know if you read those books when you were a kid, they're choose your own adventure books, right? Where you're like, okay, you get to the end of page 25 and it's like, do you want to go into the forest or do you want to go into the dark tunnel? And it's like, oh, if you go to the dark tunnel, go to page 72 and it takes you to that part of the story and it kind of keeps going. And I feel like what I loved about those books is it gave me that feeling of choice. Now, ironically, if you think about it, it's like, well, actually, I don't really have a lot of choice. I had 2 choices I could make, right? And then the story arc is kind of carrying from there. But it did make me feel like I was in control. And there's this principle in learning called andragogy, which is effectively like adult-based learning. And one of the key tenets of it is that you've got to be able to choose your own adventure. You've got to be able to have agency in your learning and be able to decide what's best for me, like how I want to consume the learning and be able to push back as well. And so as you think about designing an environment, like somebody comes to you and they say, hey, like we've got this conference coming up and we're going to go virtual. We've always done this in person. What are the first couple of things that you start thinking about before you even start designing the environment?
How many people, right?
Yeah.
So we're not really built to be in groups of more than 100, right? I think there's a lot of, what's the study? Not anthropology. Anyways, you get my point.
Yeah.
We'll put that out. Whatever the word is, we're designed to be in groups like of 100, right? Like your tribe. And so even if you get more than that in a room, people aren't going to talk, right? We really do well in groups of twos and less, right? And so first off is how many people do you want to come to this event? How do you get them to feel comfortable sharing their opinions, right? And so if it's, tens of thousands of people, okay, well, you can't have 10,000 rooms of 20 people, right? That's just fiscally not responsible.
Yeah.
And so how do you create moments that still give you that small group feeling, even in a larger space, right? And so that's why you think about at a party, you don't hopefully just have a wide open room. You have tables, right? You have vignettes of furniture, places where people can go and have a conversation.
The kitchen, the balcony, like there's space, right? Yeah.
But then taking a next step further is, okay, well, people don't want to just say, what do you do for a living, right? That's our opening line for everything. And so having topic cards on each table, this topic is about, let's talk over here about AI. Let's talk over here about, venture capitalism or whatever, right? Whatever the topic of the party is, and giving people designated areas to talk about that. Not that you can't move around and still talk about other places, but people know like, hey, I'm coming to this corner because this interests me. Almost like speed dating, right? And say, hey guys, we're going to take 20 minutes. Everyone go to a table or a corner or a topic that interests you and then move around, right? And so how do you do the same thing digitally that you would in person? And there's a lot of applications out there that can kind of simulate it, but still giving them that idea of agency again, right? And so I start thinking about how many people, what is the purpose of the conference, right? Why are people really there? Is the focus to learn and you just are trying to gain information, or is it really networking focused? Because sometimes they're like, well, we want everything, but it doesn't always work, right? You have to have a primary and then, build out your event from there based off of what your real goals are. And then from there, start thinking about budget, right? Obviously. You could want to build the most beautiful event in the world with $5,000. It's not going to happen, right? And so thinking about how can you still do something amazing in a constrained budget. And so those are top 3 things. And then I start going to design after that, right? Based off of the main goals and topics.
And what's the most common feedback? Like when you built an environment and, people have never used an environment like this. It's their first time and they've either done an activation or for a new product, or they've, as you say, you've done a conference. What's the most common kind of like delight that people share with you from using this type of an environment?
It's something different. It felt unique. I think a lot of people, I like the real world feeling in a digital environment, right? I'm not, so I think the idea is people are just looking to connect and build community. And they don't get that from a very sterile, let me talk at you for 45 minutes type scenario. So how do you make it more inclusive to build a community? What does that look like to get them involved? Because if you're involved in something, you're more likely to remember it. You're more
Right.
likely to share about it and feel like you were really a part of something that day and didn't just attend some random networking event, got a free drink, and then moved on, right? And don't remember who even paid for the drinks, right? It's
Yeah.
not about just having an open bar. It's did they remember who paid for it, why they were there, and come walking away with an actionable item or a person they met that they felt like they could do business with.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed in the last bunch of years, I think really post pandemic, is I've thought about getting on planes to go to conferences, and I look at the speaker list, or even if it's like like I go to belong to this organization where the speaker list is not actually available, so you have no idea who's going to be at the conference speaking. And
Yeah.
then I kind of look at the speakers, and I'm like, well, that talk is on YouTube. So like I can consume that speaker's content, but what I can't do is I can't connect with people, right? Like I can't connect with the people that are at the conference who are thinking about the things I'm thinking about, care about the things I'm thinking about, that got decided to go to this conference. So I love that you're thinking about the connectivity piece of it, and like, supporting the conversation, not just from a networking level, but from like a sharing of ideas. Like, here's a great question to get you started in your conversation, not like, hey, my name is Mike, this is what I do for a living sort of thing, right? Like the standard
Yeah.
networking, boring thing that we all do. So I love that you're putting that into this space. One of the interesting things about human connection that seems to be shifting in a way is just this birth of and growth of AI. Like AI is like the depersonalization of our lives in some ways, and that we've got this thing that we can talk to, but it's not another human being. Everybody's like, you got to use it more and more and more and more, right? So it's like, okay, I'll use it all the time. But I think if that's one hand, Greg Smith has been on the podcast recently, the CEO and co-founder of Thinkific. And he, his comment was like, as we are in this world where we're trying to do more and more with AI and kind of like depersonalizing the experience of work, it's like the kind of other side of that coin is people are going to crave human connection and the ability to be around people and be in conversation. And I hear you saying like, yeah, that's the key to the design of a really good experience, is not just like, not just how it looks, but like, how are we creating community for people that are coming into this online environment?
Yeah, if you think about a conference, a lot of times you attend and you might meet 5 people, exchange business cards or LinkedIn, and reach out to 3, right? So
Sure.
it tends to be real small.
Yeah.
But what are you doing beyond the conference that has legs, right? People think like, oh, the conference is done, move on. But like, are you doing a monthly meetup afterwards for people who really like that topic? Like, are you engaging them, not just on social media where they might see it, depending on whether or not their algorithm shows it to them, right? And so that is beyond the conference or beyond the one meeting. We have to think about how do things have legs, because that's how you ultimately build that community. And I don't think a Slack channel or a Discord channel is bad, but it's also not as personal either, because you're still just getting a bunch of opinions. You're not really getting to sit down and have a conversation like we are, right? So what does that look like for a brand? I think is important. Where I do think AI helps is that it's a good spaghetti against a wall litmus test for your ideas, right? I work remote. I can't always be with my team. And so, especially if we're in different time zones, I can't ask them a question, hey, do you have 10 minutes to brainstorm? They're sleeping. And so AI is a good way to be like, here's my parameters, give me some ideas, right? Does this sound like it would have good connections? But it can't be your end all be all for every decision making in your life, right? Like, should I do X, Y, and Z with my business? You have to make that decision ultimately. So there has to be a human touch involved. And I feel like I've gotten a little dumber using AI at times, because like I'll go to write an email or a newsletter or something marketing campaign related, and I'll be like kind of stuck because I've been relying so much on AI to have that conversation and that creative feedback. And sometimes it repeats itself too, right? So maybe I'm not getting fresh ideas that you
Right.
would get with a human person. And so I think it helps in a lot of ways, but it can't be your end all be all for every part of your life.
So recently I had Kian Gohar on the podcast, who was the executive director of Singularity University and the X Prize. And he's done a lot of work in research with Jeremy Utley on AI and on this dumbing down of society effectively. And, his comment was like, AI is like, a generative AI is kind of like a golden retriever. Like, it just wants to please you.
It does. Yeah.
Right. But
Like
it
it'll
doesn't.
get stuff wrong and I'll be like, are you sure this wasn't right? Be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, you're
Yeah.
right. I'm like, well, if you messed that up, what did you mess up, 10 times ago when I was doing like a, business heavy decision,
Yeah.
in math or, data or something of that nature. So, you gotta check your T's and dot your I's.
I think one of the challenges is like if you're not an expert or at least quite knowledgeable in a topic, and then you go ask ChatGPT about it, you don't know whether or not it's got it right or not, or whether or not it's trying to tell you based on what it's learned about you the answer it thinks you want. Because it's effectively doing that. It's trying to give you the answer it thinks you want, whether or not that's actually the best answer. And I think the challenge that, Kian brought into place is like, imagine if that's your brainstorming partner. And so it's just trying to give you what it thinks you want, not what your blind spots are or what you don't know to ask it. So for us to think about it as a collaborator, but not to give up our own, as you say, like not to like get dumber as we use it, right? Because it can feel like lazy sometimes to put it in there and then think like, wait, well, I don't like, what do I think about this?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think sometimes it's almost like start with the big question in mind, ask it to explore the possibilities or put your own possibilities in, but use it as a partner. Don't use it as like, I think he described it well when he said people use it like Google. Like I'm going to ask a question and then I'm just going to consume the answer instead of thinking about it like it's a conversational partner, right? And so when you think about what your experience design and how you want to see AI come into that experience design, like what do you think is going to happen? Like what do you think is going to happen like over the next 3 to 5 years as we watch AI drift into these learning spaces, these conference spaces? Like how is that going to shift our experience?
I think it helps a lot in the organizational side of things, right? I can give it a lot of data. It can make tables for me. It can help with productivity in that way, as
Yeah.
like an executive assistant. So I do appreciate it for that purpose. I think from a design perspective, we've used Midjourney a lot in our business as a way
Yeah.
to create digital backgrounds for our 3D immersive worlds.
Yeah.
Right. And we've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by using it because we no longer have to 3D model everything. We can kind of
Right.
create the backgrounds and be anywhere. Right. So that has been very effective. But I think when you come to like high scale videos, I'm a little skeptic, even with Google's VO3. I don't know if you've played around with that at all. And just the videos that are coming out, you can just tell they're AI, right? Like there's a roundness to the faces. There's a weird sheen of the video quality that kind of comes out and you just know. And so what it's doing in some ways is making me trust videos less because
Yeah.
people now know there's so much AI out there that you're just so mistrusting of everything you see. But I think it does speed up the process, at least again for spaghetti against the wall, right? What
Yeah.
could this look like? Wait, what does this campaign maybe with this color imagery? And it gives you a quick idea without having to spend all this time and money, which is great. You can iterate a lot faster. Do I think it's going to fully replace everything? No, I'm still seeing a lot of need for Photoshop on even generated images and adjustments, especially because you have a creative vision in your head. And there's only so many words you can give AI before it starts depreciating on what you get.
Right.
And so you're still going to want to tweak it to be what your vision is because it can't read your mind yet. Now, if Musk can do that, take his Neuralink to AI, then maybe we'll get some better image quality in videos, but not till then.
It kind of reminds me about 3D printing, right? When 3D printing came about, where, in the past to build a model of something, you either had to like go build out of the clay. It was super time consuming. It looked close to what the final product, but not really the final product was going to look like.
Yeah.
The step between that and a final product was getting the tools and the dies and like it's really expensive tooling to get one, just to see if the thing that you want to make. But the reality is that once you've made that tool, if it doesn't work, you have to go make a brand new set of tools, right? Like tools and dies to be able to produce more of those things, if there's any shift at all. Whereas with the 3D printer, you can kind of like, it's going to be a few hours, but I can like throw this in and overnight it'll build one. Is it the most efficient way to build a lot of them? No, not at all. But at least I could start and see what it could look like. And I feel like, the video tools and the background tools that are coming out right now, like Midjourney and others, are giving us this ability to say like, before I go put a lot of time and energy into this, let me just do a quick mock-up. But the mock-ups that used to be like a black and white wireframe on a piece of paper or like a rough sketch on an iPad are these like phenomenal mock-ups that are really close to being ready. And I think the same thing it looks like from a generative AI perspective, like if you can get it 90 to 95% right, and then the tweaks around it are the editing to make it perfect or to make it, to a place where it feels like I could have actually written this. This is exactly how I think. It feels like that's where it's at right now. It's like this like really cool ability to prototype something that used to take us a long time to prototype, and now we can just build it fast and see if we like it and then start to iterate from there. Almost like a minimum viable product kind of concept, right? Is that?
Yeah, I think you're thinking about it in the right way. I mean, I have a friend who has had this vision for a collaborative game that he's wanted to develop for a while. And so with AI, he can do, 70, 80% of it through using AI and getting all the code together, which would have taken him maybe more months than he would have liked to put into it. But then he takes the last 20% and gets it over the finish line, right? Makes you reviewing the code. Is it clean? Is it really the mechanics he wants? Throwing in, again, that human perspective of how things you would want them to function. And so we are seeing more and more apps and games come online because people can get it 80% of the way there and then put their 20% human touch on it. So I think from a technology perspective, it's amazing, even from a creative perspective as well. So I like that it makes my job faster in some places, but in other places, there's so many people putting out AI apps now that you want to try that I feel like I'm spending more time trying new apps than actually doing the work, right? Whether it's editing videos is a big one. Can you take all this footage that I've collected over the years and create a new sizzle video for me? Like I still haven't found the perfect AI that does that for me yet. So I think you got to be careful how you use it. Just because it says AI doesn't mean it's going to save you time. Be mindful of that.
One of the things so I have a friend in London, England, and she used to be the head of data science in the banking industry and for a bunch of big brands. And we were chatting about just, personal uses of AI. And I said to her, hey, like, are you playing around with, Google? And like, I know you're already using ChatGPT. And her response was, well, I've got a lot in ChatGPT now. So the cost of switching for me is actually really high to move all of that data and everything I've loaded in to personalize it and make it useful to her. So I think one of the challenges when these apps come out, I agree, there's so many of them to kind of try out, but then where are you hosting all of this? Like there's no kind of like central repository. There's not like a Dropbox for all my AI stuff that I could like then go use other AIs against it. And so it feels like there's a high cost of switching. So once you're grounded in a platform, you really got to think about if you're going to use it from a generative AI perspective. Like obviously Google's built into the Google Suite and Microsoft's got ChatGPT in the background for all of its apps, but your native product, the one you're using for your personal stuff and work stuff, it's hard to switch.
Yeah, I have heard of some people building like a model that intakes all of the models, right?
Okay.
And I don't know that there's one on the market that does that. I don't sue me if there is one, but I just don't know of it. But I have heard of some people trying to do that for that very reason, because they also, all the AIs answer a little bit differently, right? You can ask all of them the same question and you might get slightly different sources. Some are more like amalgamations of all the sources it sees and gives you a summary versus obviously like Perplexity gives you like all of the sites that it talks about that phrase. So it kind of depends on, I think, what you're needing from it in a lot of ways. Like if I'm just looking for a quick answer to something, like I use Gemini, right? Or Google, right? Because
you're already in there.
In Google, right? But if I need more descriptions or I need research, Perplexity is my go-to. And so I am very spread across a lot of AIs right now. So I would like a central database at one point. And, there is a way to build it. I just don't know that I've seen it done yet.
Yeah, it's kind of like, no one's built the centralized messaging app either. Right. Right. There's a few tools that are out there, but they're not really prolific, where it's like, I've got Facebook Messenger and Instagram Messenger and WhatsApp and iMessage and email and multiple emails and and then Slack and like all of those things live in different software. And each day I have to go in and look at notifications in all these different places. And it feels like AI is trending that way. And like, you mentioned Perplexity. I like Perplexity because I know that it's using ChatGPT. I know it's going to Claude. I know it's going to a number, it's pulling from a number of different AIs and then saying, hey, I use this AI to do this thing,
Yeah.
as opposed to me having to think which AI. And then, if it's ChatGPT, it's not just which AI, but which model within ChatGPT, which most people just leave the default 4 point whatever we're at right now, sitting there, 4.5. I think that's what we're at. Just basically leaving that one or 4.0, leaving it open, and then just typing to that, not even knowing you can click. And there's like 6 different options of models depending on the type of thing that you're using. I feel like we're still in that sort of early stages where everyone is sort of like trying all the things out. And I wonder if we're going to end up in a place where we've got our own kind of living, breathing, almost like, what was that Joaquin Phoenix movie with Scarlett Johansson? Her, right? Where it's like, there's this one thing, which I think Siri was supposed to become that, but like they've kind of shit the bed, frankly. So on that whole rollout, but I feel like we need that personal AI that can kind of consume from all these different sources and then just get to know us so that it can start to think. And what it doesn't do right now is it doesn't, from an experience perspective, it isn't taking in things and saying, based on what I know about you, hey, maybe this weekend would be a good idea to take some downtime. Or, hey, I know you've read all these detective novels recently, and that you've said you really like them. There's a new author that just launched, and I read the book. It's very similar. I think you might like it, right? Like, where it's kind of like forecasting and giving us suggestions about things that we might like. I mean, I guess kind of like what Amazon's, a lot of people who bought this would also like to buy that. That's trying to commercially sell us something. And of course, that is going to be a commerce engine. But on a personal basis, like, I just think, I wonder where that's going to go. Like if we're going to get that ability soon.
Well, I mean, the rumor is OpenAI is working on some type of wearable, right? And
The
so,
Johnny Ive collaboration, right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
so the question is, if it is a wearable, what does it look like? How invasive does it look like? And then would that listen to my daily conversations and be able to
Yeah.
be that for me, right? Like you're a personal therapist in a lot of ways, right? Or your life coach that walks you through and recommends things to you. I like the concept of it, but then I kind of go back to like my autonomy.
Yeah.
That if I'm constantly being told, I mean, maybe this is just me. If I'm constantly being told what I should do, I
Yeah.
don't want to do it. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I like the idea of recommendations, but I'm getting a lot of that from all over the place. And so there's just so much noise. And
Yeah.
we live in a world of noise, whether it's whatever I'm watching on TV, the ads in the middle of our podcasts, right? Like, which is not a bad thing. But, like all these different things that I'm hearing. And so I have a hard time kind of coming back to attention,
Right.
focusing on what's really important. And so that's why I think so many people right now are like putting their phones in the safe, going for 2-hour walks, right? Trying to get away from some of that because they need to quiet their minds in order to feel grounded and refreshed. And so I like the idea of having something that's able to recommend things that it knows I'm going to like, remind me that, I have a doctor's appointment in 20 minutes or something. But I also want some quiet. And so what's the balance of that going to be in the future? I don't know that I want a her situation.
Mm-hmm.
I want humans. I want the connection versus technology.
And I think that's right back to where we were, closer to the beginning of this podcast, is that how do we, use this AI as a tool without losing that personal connection? Because the reality is that our DNA has not really changed. I mean, we are wired, right? Like we're wired for connection. That's just who we are in the world. And because if we weren't connected, 10,000 years ago, our survival was unlikely. And so we're just sort of wired to be with people. So I love that. I really appreciate that, you're regrounding us in the community and in connection. And that when you're thinking about building environments that people are going into, that you have that level of empathy, because all of us who are experiencing the environments that get the opportunity to actually have fun and experience your environments, they exist because you sat back as somebody who cares a lot about people's experience and empathize with them, and then built something that they could have a memorable, connected experience in. Ahna, I'm deeply grateful for you making time to be on the podcast today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. Lovely conversation.